Hello, my name's Reimagine, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 103, and I'll be talking to Laura Hartley, an activist, coach, and founder of Public Love Enterprises, an online school empowering changemakers to radically reimagine the world, creating the conditions for social healing and collective thriving. Laura is fascinated by the space between inner and outer change, and her work empowers changemakers to get free, dismantling capitalism and oppressive systems from the inside out. She runs programs in healing burnout culture, regenerative leadership, and finding your purpose in changing the world. Hello and welcome to Laura. How are you, Laura?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm so excited to be having this conversation.
I'm excited too, and especially because this is a first thing in the morning for you because of the time zone difference. So I'm so grateful you got up possibly a little earlier for us to have this conversation, and I'm trusting we're going to capture some real magic that we're going to share with others.
Absolutely. And, I think it's worth it for an early start. So living in Sydney, Australia, it's very often an early call for other parts of the world.
That's right. And I'm grateful for it. So what do you believe about yourself? And do you feel it defines who Laura is?
Oh, that's such a big question of who am I and who Laura is. I'm not sure that can be surmised into a single sentence in its entirety. But as for what I do, I'm an activist, I'm a coach, and I run an online school for changemakers. And, this work of taking the individual work and the inner work of changing the world, of social justice, of collective healing is really what I'm passionate about. And that obviously stems from a deep part of myself and my love for what transformation and what possibility can hold within us.
I understand it's a massive question, but I like to ask it because I think some guests that I've had are able to give their version of it and others can and cannot. There's never a right and wrong answer. It's really about the version of yourself that you're ready to share with the world today.
The version of myself that I'm ready to share with the world today, I think, that's a beautiful way to approach it. If I'm looking at who I am, we're also looking at my story. We're looking at how I kind of came to do the work today. So, I grew up in a household surrounded by personal development and spirituality. My mother trained life coaches 30 years ago when it was a very new profession. So it was something that was fundamental to kind of shaping who and how I am, this understanding that we have the capacity for change and that we have the capacity to look within. And, that fascination of my inner world really only grew stronger as I entered my adolescence, and I struggled with deep depression and deep anxiety. I was hospitalized with mental health struggles, and it was a very pivotal time in my life that again caused me to look within myself and go, well, what is my inner world? What is shaping it? What is my relationship to it? How do I make peace with these parts of myself that I'm struggling? And this fascination with our inner worlds then really in a way led me to understand this idea of looking at callings, looking at vocation and purpose. And, I really consider my purpose and my callings to be helping changemakers to do the inner work themselves. Because as an activist, it's so easy to burn out. It is so easy to get caught up in perfectionism, to feel like you're not doing enough, to get stuck in this hustle culture of trying to change the world, that we're still, no matter what we're doing, we're just like the next meeting, the next action, the next event. And actually, we need to start to look within and start to slow down and challenge our participation in the systems around us. Look at the ways that we're showing up. And that's really inner work. So, my story and who I am is this love of transformation, this love of possibility, this love of change. And how do we use our inner worlds, our own lives, the places within us to change how we show up in the world?
Such an interesting story in what you've just shared. There's so much within there, Laura, that I'd love to unravel as much as we can within this segment, but I feel like there's going to be follow-up conversations, and we're only in, I don't know, a couple of minutes into the interview itself. I love how you made the stark contrast of your environment, of how you've been raised in that constant revolving door of change of what your parents had amplified in your environment. But yet, somehow, when you seated here on this planet, it seemed the change was spiraling you backwards potentially.
Mm. Yeah, the responses definitely spiraled me within. I was taught from a very young age that we have agency over our lives, that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. And I think that's a powerful teaching because that really causes you to look within. So when things in your life aren't in the way that you want them to be, perhaps we can't change that. Perhaps I don't always have the power to change that specific event that is occurring. But I do have the power to look within me and to say, what do I want my response to this to be? How do I want to make meaning out of this? How do I want to integrate this into the story of who I am? And what do I want it to mean when in propelling me forward into the life that I'm living? So it's definitely a spiral, and backwards, maybe less so, but definitely inward in a sense.
Is that how you came to the calling, or perhaps one of the callings, because I feel that we all have very many callings to do what you are doing in being an activist, but also being the founder of Public Love Enterprises, which is a liberating space for an online school? Is that all because of what's happened, or how did you
Yes,
get to that space?
that's a good question. In a sense, yes. In another sense, no. My passion for activism and for the world was really actually born out of my depression as a teenager, discovering at 19, that there is this world larger than myself that actually really needed us to really challenge the way that we were showing up for that world, and caring for it was a deep calling for me that really helped bring me out of my experiences as a teenager, learning that, climate change, environmental loss, we live in the sixth mass extinction. We've lost 2/3 of our wildlife in the last 50 years. So there's these incredible events happening around us. And that was part of my healing and part of my awakening, to actually realize that and go, oh, well, what is my place in this? How am I perpetuating this? And how can I start to change this and challenge it? Mm-hmm. And then obviously my experiences in activism in various different forms of playing with how do we change the world led me to starting Public Love Enterprises last year. So it's an online school for changemakers to do the inner work of activism. Now, a changemaker is anybody from a nonprofit worker to a frontline activist to a social entrepreneur, a volunteer, whatever you are called to do in this world. If you are doing it for a purpose larger than yourself, you are a change maker. Mm-hmm. And it's so common in that sphere that we struggle with experiences like burnout, like perfectionism. I've had my own experiences with these. I've had, my own experiences with burnout. And then seeing the amount around me in those spheres, and we're losing so many wonderful change makers just because we're exhausted, made me realize something needs to change. We need to reevaluate the way that we make change, the way that we interact with each other, and start to look at creating a deeper foundation for our work.
Absolutely. I do agree, and I feel it is crucial and critical for us to be self-reflective and do the introspection work, especially if we were to amplify our mission and our version of ourselves outside to the world. What do you feel are some of the attributes that connect you to your purpose?
I have a strong sense of intuition and callings. And really, to have that for myself is really because I've done a lot of work of getting free, of getting free of culture, of all the shoulds in my mind that say that I'm supposed to be doing a certain thing in order to be a good activist, a good daughter, a good person, a good partner, whatever it might be, that I should be doing X, Y, or Z. And trust me, I still have my fair share. They're still there. But I've also done my work in challenging them. And in being able to challenge them, I'm able to tune in, well, what are my callings? What are my gifts? What am I really being called to in this time? And a lot of that is body work. Where is my body opening when I'm thinking about this thing, or am I feeling closed and heavy? And so when I'm looking at my callings and my purpose, I'm looking at speaking, I'm looking at writing, and looking at the gifts that I always loved, that I've always been passionate about doing these things. And then what is the topic that is real for me today? What is the one that is meaningful? What aligns with me? What truth do I have that's sitting there, perhaps in my chest or in my throat, that I haven't quite been able to articulate yet, or that I'm not hearing spoken in the world? And to be able to do that work, I think for any of us to tune in with what's real for us, to follow our purpose. And I really believe every single one of us has callings. Like, it's a very spiritual term, but every one of us, regardless of our belief, has those little voices that go, yes, this. And to be able to do that just requires us to challenge those shoulds and to start to look at what is it that makes us feel good? What is it that moves us? What is it that breaks our heart that we want to change? And that's the space that I think I'm gifted to have identified to me because of those spaces that I was when I was younger.
Now, that's an interesting place of introspection, to witness all the challenges and troubled times, if I can say, that you've had as a younger individual, and to be able to transform and understand that to a greater purpose for you, to feel like you're giving meaning and you're having an impact, and it's not just a 9-to-5 job and doing your thing. Not that I'm mocking that, but it's doing it from a place of selflessness.
And I think meaning is made, it's not inherent. And I think that's something that, again, I learned at a young age from those experiences of really crippling depression. And as I mentioned, actually discovering that there was this world larger than my pain, larger than what I was experiencing, was part of my healing. So it makes sense that to go from, okay, well, this still needs integrating, and my pain still needed a lot of processing and a lot of healing and a lot of inner work myself. But to extrapolate it outward into, well, how do I want to use this? How do I want to make meaning out of this? How do I want to serve out of this? Was always a question that's kind of front of mind. And I'm very grateful for those experiences that I think were a teacher for me in many ways to look at my path going forward.
And it takes a lot of courage and strength to witness it, but also to honor it for what it is, because we've all been through challenging times. And we can't always say to them all, thank you for all that trouble, tears, and all that pain that was amplified through that experience.
We can't. And I think it's, I am careful with the line there that I'm very grateful for my experiences, and I choose to say thank you to them. And that's not something that is true for absolutely every single person. I think that's sometimes one of those slightly toxic spiritual teachings that, like, we should just, like, be grateful for every bad thing that's ever happened to us. And like, well, sure, maybe with a very large degree of inner work, but there's a lot of us who have experienced trauma and pain and grief and unimaginable things that have no explanation. And I'm not sure that gratitude is the answer for that.
Mm.
But it's certainly the wholeness of our experiences, and recognizing that all of our experiences make us human, that all of our emotions make us human. And for me, those more challenging emotions have certainly made me grateful for that. But it is a fine line to walk there.
Yes, and perhaps this is where our conversation could potentially get really interesting, because I am of the school of thought that every single thing that happens to us, how painful it is, how constructive it is, or how destructive it can be, it does present itself for a reason. And that is based on the spiritual work that I have done for myself and I take my clients through. But that's going possibly in a little bit of a different topic, because this conversation is about you and the skills and the tools that you bring to the table as a master of your craft in being an activist and supporting others on their journey. So, what are your intentions with the crafts that you have harnessed in your own experiences that now put you in this space to do what you do? What is it you want to deliver and give out to those who either join the school or amplify?
So, the mission of the school and the work that I do is really about creating the conditions for a collective thriving. It is about creating the conditions for social healing. It's about creating the conditions to reimagine and remake the world. Because a lot of the time, there is this line sometimes with wellness teachings and spiritual teachings that I believe we have an incredible amount of agency within. And sometimes it neglects the outer world. It neglects the impact of the outer world. So when we're looking at burnout as a really good example, and we treat it purely as, this personal resiliency issue that, I just wasn't strong enough, or I needed to be more mindful, or just practice a little bit more gratitude, and then I would have been fine and I wouldn't have burnt out. Sure, great. Like, those things are wonderful tools. But we also need to look at the environment that we live in. And if we are living and working in an environment that tells us that we always need to be doing more, being more, growing more, we're living in an environment that sells to our insecurities 24/7. We're living in an environment that says there's not enough time and you need to hurry up and you need to work even faster. We're very much living in a hierarchical society still, whether so it's like, okay, well, I'm not top of the ladder yet, but I'll be happy when. Right. Well, then, of course, burnout makes sense. Mm-hmm. So the answer there is both to look within. It is to look at our agency. It is to look at how we make meaning and about our needs, our boundaries. It's definitely to look at our spiritual callings and our vocation. Are we doing what is ours? I think that is such a big question. And it is to look without. It's to look around us. What are the conditions that we need to thrive? Because if you have a tomato plant and it's not growing, we don't blame the plant. We look at the sunlight, we look at the rain, we look at the quality of the nutrients, we look at the conditions it has to thrive naturally. And that's where I think sometimes we're missing in the work of wellness, in the work of spirituality, that we look at the conditions within, but we also need to look at the conditions around us. And that's certainly the point of my school, is how do we start to create the conditions for collective thriving, for us all to live on a planet and in a life and in a world that is abundant, that is full of love, that is full of justice, that is full of kindness and compassion.
How have you seen that shift take place, especially over the last couple of years with all that's gone on in the world? Have you seen that amplified even further in terms of the business that you offer, or has it regressed? And there is more burnout and there is less introspection, but more thriving for materialistic gain?
It's a good question. I don't think I have a big enough picture in a way to say at a global level. The rate of burnout is definitely increasing, without a doubt. And that is not just in change-making spheres, that is, in corporate spaces, in the medical industry, in life. Now, just so many of us are struggling with burnout and with exhaustion. So I think that is rising. And I still believe that there is another world that is being born out of this time. I still believe that there are beautiful, amazing transformations that are happening. And when we're looking at the reality and the futures of the climate crisis or other areas that we're struggling collectively with today, there is this holding of both hands that yes, there is destruction, yes, there is loss, yes, there is grief, yes, there is pain. And I think something beautiful can still be born out of this. So I've definitely seen an increase in burnout. And I've also, I think, over COVID and over the pandemic in the last few years, people are more inclined to challenge their lives a little bit. You've seen the Great Resignation, where people are leaving their jobs. You see people choosing different ways of living. They're leaving the cities and moving further out for a sea change. So it's a both and situation. Yes, more burnout, and yes, more people really reassessing what is important to them at the same time.
Do you recall a situation scenario, be it your students or be it just the sense and feel of what's going on in your environment, especially in this space, of perhaps more innovative ideas, opportunities that are being presented? Be it one could say, I've got a brilliant idea to create XYZ, and that potentially could have only come into formation because of the heavy and the deep struggles that we have had to dig deeper. Similarly to your own experience of all the heaviness that you witnessed first in your own life, it caused you to really dig deep. Have you seen that reflect out in others?
I have, absolutely. I'm conscious that I won't give specific examples of other people's, but absolutely, it is one of those things when we have the ability to stop and pause and to go, actually, you know what, this is not working for me. Like, where am I going to take the space to really reassess what's important and to start to make these changes? Big challenges and big changes have come for people. That is part of this work. Burnout's a great example that I use a lot because very often, we're just trying to do the same thing, just not burnt out. We're just like, you know what, it's fine. I just need to be a little bit, I need to meditate a bit more and drink a bit more green juice and get to the gym a little bit more. And then I can just keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing. But whatever it is that you were doing was not working for you on one level. It was not just a matter of personal resiliency deficit or something. So when we actually create that space of, okay, my needs are met, these are my needs, I've identified them, I've set some boundaries, I've rested my body and my mind and my spirit, and what is this little voice that says that actually, you know what, this is not what I want to be doing. This isn't the job that I want to be doing. I care about this movement, I care about this cause, I care about this industry, and this is not what I want to be doing right now. And that's usually when those big changes come. But it takes a while for people to get to that point where they can make those reassessments, where they can go, well, actually, what is it that I'm being called to right now? And it's a scary step because a lot of the time, I think you know this as well, the things we're called to are not safe. They're not traditionally acceptable. They're not always where we thought our lives would go. So we need to challenge that belief about ourselves that sometimes, our life isn't going to turn out the way that we thought it would. Sometimes our callings are things that our parents, our community, our collectives around us wouldn't necessarily have approved of or thought of for us. And so it takes that bit of groundedness and that bit of courage before we're able to take that step. But it's absolutely something that I'm seeing more and more.
And it does take a lot of courage, especially when you are going against not only the societal narrative and the stereotypical labeling that is so ingrained in our culture and environment, but also conditioned from the people who are nurturing us, who I want to say supposedly love us, and who have put us, who are in our inner circle sphere to say, it's okay, Laura, it's okay, you can do what you want to do. I think she should really go to university and get an economics degree. So all of that is where the bigger challenge I feel is, and why we need the extra charge of courage, not only for ourselves, but be able to find people who are going to support us on it without any judgment.
Yes. And that is a hard thing for a lot of people at a lot of stages that they're at. Our communities sometimes are very much based on what we do and not who we are. And so when that is the case and we want to change what it is that we're doing, we're wanting to go in a different direction, we're sometimes afraid that, that support isn't going to be there. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not true, but finding that community of people who are able to accept you as you are, that are able to trust that you know what you're doing, trust that you have the ability to land on your feet, trust that you have the ability to pivot and to make real big changes. These are such important factors. And it's not that, our families or whoever disapproves of our decisions doesn't love us. They do, most of the time, absolutely. Not always, but most of the time. But they've also been conditioned by culture to believe that if we follow a certain life path, we'll reach this place, this magical place of being happy and successful. That I'll be happy when I get the next promotion, when I get married, when I have kids, when I do whatever it is that I'm supposed to do, I'll be happy then.
Right.
And a lot of us, that's a big thing to be challenging within our culture, to actually say, you know what, I'm not sure that's true. And I'm going to do what makes me happy and what makes me feel good now.
How do we get to a place of, I want to use your terminology, detoxing from this culture?
I think this work comes from a few places. The detoxing from culture is about recognizing that the beliefs that hold us in place are not always our own. So one of the examples I give is something called internalized capitalism. And internalized capitalism is really just the equation of our worth with what we produce, or with our worth with what we're doing. And this is so common. It's not something that's conscious within our minds a lot of the time. It often operates at a very unconscious level, but it shows up in that feeling of always being on and always being busy, that you can't quite unwind, that even when you're listening to this, perhaps you're scrolling, you're on your phone, or you're looking on the internet, or you're making dinner, like we're always multitasking something at the same time. We have that experience of time scarcity, there's just never enough time. And so we say, we'll power through meetings. We've got a lot to fit in today, so we're just going to squeeze a little bit more in. Or like, thank God it's Friday. Again, that's a construct. That's of our lives. It shows up in feeling like we need to work when we're sick. And it's gotten a little bit better over the last few years for people, I think, but it's still definitely there. And I actually think it's increasing.
Yes.
So these feelings that we always need to be doing more, that's not us. That is actually the culture that we live in, that we have internalized. Yes. And so the work of getting free from that is, one, recognizing that, and two, challenging it. So where do I notice this coming up? Particularly, trust me, I'm like a type A perfectionist at times, and I get very stressed still, and I still have that time scarcity that pops into my brain of like, no, you just need to get this stuff done and just work a little bit harder. I was like, okay, no, I hear it, I see it. What's actually true right now? What does my body need? What does my body feel? Are my shoulders tense? Is my jaw locked? Is my chest open? What thought, what experience creates that sense of ease in my body right now? And honoring that. So it's these conscious choices of recognizing, am I doing this because I have internalized a sense of patriarchy and of hierarchy? And I feel like I can't share, I can't collaborate with others, or there's competition between us? Have I internalized that sense of capitalism, as I mentioned, of feeling that I'm not enough? Mm-hmm. That I'm not enough syndrome is a big one when we live in a culture that tells us that all of the time.
Yeah.
And then looking at, okay, what do I want right now? Where do I challenge this? And where do I look at my body and my inner compass to guide me into the next step?
These are all very powerful little markers that allow us to do that second look and to do a quick check-in. So I am curious for the listeners, and I'm going to try this myself, is to step into that a little bit deeper and sit with it to see what else shows up. Because What we know for sure is when there's one layer that shows up, there's always a slew more behind them. So I'm curious to hear from those who are listening to the podcast to share, if willing and open, what are the other layers that are presenting themselves that might be a little, you might need a little more courage to look at, because sometimes, I know you know this, Laura, and I know I have definitely witnessed it, is sometimes stuff will show up in front of us that we don't want to look at. So then we say, nothing else showed up. But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this isn't easy work. Like, I wish that this was like all like feel good and I'm just gonna like be great and I'm not gonna like be burnt out anymore. I'm not gonna be depressed anymore, or whatever it might be. I'm not gonna have that I'm not good enough syndrome anymore. The only way that we get there is by going into those feelings. The only way that we get there is by going into what is the truth of this experience. And very often, we've avoided it, or we've numbed it, or we've kind of glossed over it in our quest to always be doing more, because it's not a very comfortable place to be. Yes. And anyone who's experienced stress or burnout, like, your body, it is the most uncomfortable place to be at that point. Usually there's like all these little niggles and tight spots, and that's just one layer, let alone then exactly going into, well, what's my pain here? Where do I hold it? Where am I storing it? Mm-hmm. It's not easy work.
It isn't. But one thing I can definitely recommend and invite individuals on, it's, even though it's not easy work, it's definitely takes a lot of courage. But once you've gone through it, the joy and the love and the peace that comes through that experience, really difficult to express in words. It's a sensation that you must feel.
I think this is that analogy, and I don't know who this really belongs to, but of dirty pain or clean pain. That dirty pain is that long numbness of pushing down our feelings a lot, of just getting by and not really going through them. Or this clean pain, which really hurts. It's sharp and it's present and we experience it, but it ends. And that's what I think you're going to there, is that when that pain ends, there is a transformation that comes out of it. There is a healing that comes out of it, an integration. And we don't get that from the dirty pain. We don't get it from the slightly perhaps duller, but definitely more prolonged ache that we go through if we don't choose to face it.
But that's the nugget right there, is we have a choice to face it, but I also believe that we have a choice of how long we can sit in it. It's not a survival of the fittest situation of, I can sit in this pain for 3 years and 20 years. And no, this isn't what we're here to do.
Mm-mm. Oh gosh, this is so true. Exactly. We have agency, we have choice. And that was a big lesson for me in my life of, this pain is here, and for a long time, I didn't know how to face it. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the resources. And I think that's an important thing to note. You have to find your spaces and the resources that allow you and help you to do that. And they will look a little bit different for everybody, but they do exist. And then once we have found them, there's no glory in suffering. Like, we really do glorify suffering a bit in our culture. Like, we glorify being exhausted, being busy, like, oh, look how resilient you are. You're just carrying on, as if resiliency is just like endurance.
Yes.
And it's not. Like, we actually, I think we deserve to feel good. We deserve to flourish. We deserve to live thriving lives. And the more of us who do so, the better world that we will live in. Because we don't create a better world when we're experiencing scarcity, when we're experiencing shame, when we're experiencing, this internalization of like not enough-ness, or of anger towards ourselves. So that experience of opening up and challenging that, I think, is where a new world is born.
100%. I agree with what you just said, Laura. Absolutely. I think it's pivotal for us to do that. But in the same token, we've talked about it's taking courage and it takes a lot of strength to get there. Being open to allowing that tribe, community, support, wisdom, mentorship, whomever or whatever that looks like, allowing that to come in your sphere, especially when a quest is put out, because I'm sure you have seen this. A quest is put out of, I'm in burnout, I don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, the joy of algorithm, something will come through and which could be a potential solution or a support mechanism to take you out of that pain, and you dismiss it. So being very acutely aware when we ask that question, even if it's in our mind's eye, be open to receiving the responses and take action.
Absolutely. And this is such a thing, we sometimes we hold very tightly to our limitations, and we hold very tightly to our problems. And even when we're looking for a solution, we're sometimes so attached to them as part of our identity or as part of our struggles, or just because they're comfortable and familiar, that it's hard to then actually, I can put this down. I don't need to carry this anymore. And, I think there's a space for that, of actually going, okay, I've carried this, and how do I feel letting this go? Maybe it feels scary. Maybe it feels uncomfortable. Maybe it feels like lightness. Everyone will have a slightly different experience, but honoring that and recognizing that we do have agency, that maybe I don't know how, but somewhere within me, we have the capacity to change. We have the capacity to find that teacher and then to listen to it and to follow through.
Absolutely. So the follow through is the crucial part. I'm a true believer of that. So what is your next steps in building your enterprises?
So a lot of my work till now has been helping really change makers to look within and to show up differently. But I focused it around this idea in particular of burnout as one example, but also around, eco-anxiety and these fears that we have around climate change. Where I'm going now is really a deeper leadership program. So how do we become the leaders of this new world? How do we show up for a more just, a more regenerative community? And what is the inner work that needs to happen there? So next year, I have an inner leadership course starting that's really looking at getting free of these systems, understanding the environment that we live in, the conditions, that looks at our relationship to power, because so many of us understandably have a very complicated relationship to power. We feel slightly uncomfortable with it, or like it's bad and I shouldn't have it, or it must mean that I'm dominating. Especially as a woman, we've very often been told that we're bossy or dominating if we have power. Yes. And then what does it mean to follow our callings? How do we then know what is ours to do in this time? Because the world needs everything. There's no one way to make change. We need accountants looking at, their models. We need lawyers, we need educators, we need farmers, we need the entire world to really reassess the way that they work and what they're doing in this world. And that comes from a space of, well, what's true for me? Where am I called? What is my relationship to something larger than myself? So next year, still working on a title, but it will be starting early in 2023 on this inner leadership program for change makers, for wayfinders, for anybody who believes in a more beautiful world.
I love this, Laura. I think it's going to be such a pivotal piece, especially for the individuals who want something a little bit more concrete, and especially from the space of tangible and very business focused. And dare I say, not woo-woo or new agey and all that. So the guys in between who want something more concrete, especially if they're in the headspace of entrepreneurial, I want to build my own business, and what does that look like? So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
This has been such an enriching conversation. Thank you for sharing all of your vulnerabilities. Well, maybe not all of them, but some of them that gives us a little bit more concept and content around who you are, what is it you want to offer, and what are some of your missions and callings in this lifetime. So thank you so much, Laura.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. And, I love your podcast and the work that you're doing as well. So I appreciate this opportunity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm Niranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.